What is our relationship to life on Earth? And that's really the question that's at the heart of this. It's not whether I kill a right whale or not. It's like, what is your relationship to the whales in general, and what do you want that legacy to be?
There's going to be a shift, I think, in the culture of lobster fishing.
We can all look at a problem, and because we're all looking at a different part of it, we don't really see that we're looking at the same thing.
Maine's future is all of ours, but so is, the health of the ocean. It's all of humanity's.
A Parent Wins, an adventure of a lifetime. A global expedition dedicated to collecting stories of environmental and cultural preservation while conducting marine research aboard sailing vessel Resilience.
So we're sailing around the world collecting stories of environmental and cultural preservation. But what happens when those two things are at odds? That's exactly what we discovered when we talked to Zach and Sarah.
You talk about lobstering and you talk about Maine, and that is a massive part of Maine culture.
Lobster is our most iconic species in Maine. It is a huge part of the culture. It's a huge part of our identity, and we depend on it so much. Through my career on the Whale Watch, inevitably, doing sometimes 200 or 300 trips a season, we would encounter whales or find them at times that were entangled in fishing gear. Right? And then off the coast of Maine, we happen to have a lot of lobster fishing gear. The whales were minkies or humpbacks or finbacks. I never have seen a right whale entangled that I knew was entangled, But the right whale is the most endangered, so that is the one that, it's at a very high level of interest and very important, kind of critical issue that's at a peak right now.
What's known as an entanglement discovered by the New England Aquarium on an endangered right whale known as snow cone.
The issue of right whale entanglement in Maine is massive, and there have been a lot of things lately to try to mitigate that risk.
What I was interested in and have been interested in is how could we use technology to allow fishermen to continue to fish, but then maybe remove the lines so that whales can avoid being entangled. We have this incredible amount of resources right now. This moment we have this, and we have the right whale driving this. So we have this great opportunity, and that's the way I continue to view this, is it's an opportunity. Because one of the things we identified early on in starting to test gear and then working with fishermen and seeing their excitement and what it could potentially do, and realizing that there's a lot of obstacles that have to be figured out, and we're asking a huge amount of fishermen to ask them to change the way they fished, and are we sure that this is going to work? Is it going to cost them a huge amount of money? There's a lot of questions. How do I know that I'm guaranteed that this is going to be as efficient, or is it going to take more time and then I'm going to lose money? These are really this is really important, but it's not just about the right whale for me. It's never just been about the right whale. It's also about the minke whales and the humpbacks and finbacks that I've seen entangled. And the question for the industry and for fishermen is, if you can fish without harming whales, if you can do that and you're getting financial support from society so that it doesn't cost you more money, but society is willing to pay for you to make that transition and do it, are you willing to do it? Because it is a humane and moral issue. What is our relationship to life on Earth? And that's really the question that's at the heart of this. It's not whether I kill a right whale or not. It's like, what is your relationship to the whales in general, and what do you want that legacy to be?
I thought it was really interesting watching Zach talk about the issue of entanglements. He clearly sees this intrinsic beauty in the nature of them, and I think that that's a really important view to have.
It was really interesting hearing what Zach had to say, because the idea of changing our fishing practices and changing the way that we think about our relationship with cetacean life, with whale life, and other marine life in the area makes a lot of sense. If we want to be responsible, we can take these steps and that will be the result. And it was therefore really intriguing to sail from Bangor to Rockland and meet with somebody with a completely different perspective. Somebody that also has a background in research, but is a lobster woman or lobsterman. And having both sides of the story really helps to paint a more full picture. And it was really a special experience.
Sarah Leader is a really interesting woman because she comes from what can be seen as two very different worlds, and at this time in Maine, maybe two very conflicting worlds of cetacean biology and lobstering.
Over the last, 10, 15 years, we've been implementing these measures to protect North Atlantic right whales and other marine mammals, specifically endangered large whales, from entanglement in lobster fishing gear. Fishermen have had to put up all of the costs for those modifications. So at first it was breakaway points on the buoys so that the buoy would break away and the whale would be able to swim free. Then it was sinking ground lines. And then, recently there's been a lot of, they've also had fishermen increase their trawl. They've put trawl limits. So instead of fishing 3 traps at a time, they have to fish 5 traps with 1 vertical line because they're trying to remove vertical lines, the most likely to entangle a whale, from the water column. I think that, the point is that these regulations have really cost fishermen a lot of money. There's no government subsidy for making these adjustments to their gear. And so fishermen are pretty fed up with this whale stuff, as they call it. And I don't blame them because it's cost them a pretty penny, and it's made it harder and harder to make a living. And there's been no real research on what effects have these changes had. There are all kind of theories of this will help whales not get entangled, but is it working? And most recently, the government said no. And they want a 90% risk reduction in whale entanglement. So the risk of entanglement needs to be reduced by 90%. That means 90% of the vertical lines need to be removed from the water column. And that would put almost every fisherman I know out of business. They fought that in court with a lawsuit and they won because the data that, just recently, because the data that was used was kind of like a worst case scenario. We think this many whales could be getting entangled, but it's we need the data on where right whales are in Maine waters, inshore and offshore, for the state fishery and the federal, part of the fishery. We need the data on when they're here. We need the data on where these entanglements occur.
Lobstermen who are out there and who have been out on the ocean their entire lives and who have been observing the ocean their entire lives, they do have that knowledge of what's going on out there.
One of the things I learned when I was a researcher was the difference between putting in effort and serving specifically for a species and spending your entire life on the water. And I think where fishermen get really overlooked is that they know quite a bit about what's going on in their environment. If you had asked someone who's been fishing their whole life the question about what's going on with the lobster population, they'd have a very different, way more complicated answer than mine because they've been doing it their entire life.
I think Sarah truly believes that lobstermen want to preserve the environment, and they do carry a ton of knowledge. And I think that sort of story is true in a lot of different places that we went as well. The people that spend the time in the environment that we're talking about, whether that be the forest or the mountains or in this case the ocean, know so much about it. They spend their day, every day, there. Maine has a beautiful culture of lobster fishing that's unique in the way that it can be done by many different people, many different sizes of operations. And it's awesome seeing, parents and their children out there doing this. We were talking about how unique and almost how fragile that ecosystem of itself is, that culture of lobstering is.
There's going to be a shift, I think, in the culture of lobster fishing where you're not going to see these single, one guy on a boat. Some guys fish by themselves, or one guy on a boat with one crew. It's not going to be this small business anymore because they're not going to be able to afford it for much longer. So I do think it's kind of a threatened, if not dying, way of life here on Maine's coast. So there's some guys that have made t-shirts that say, "Save the endangered Maine lobsterman."
There is technology and there are advancements with these new traps that have the acoustic floats on them. And if it was economically viable for lobstermen to use these traps, I think they would do it, no problem. But it seems like the biggest issue is that fishermen are having trouble making a living. And that's crazy because the prices of lobster have gone way up, yet fishermen are being paid less for every lobster. So there's clearly something in the system that's failing them.
Listening to Zach and Sarah, I feel that there's a clear bridge there. Both of them, were saying how there is a strong desire to figure this out, no matter what. And I think the key there just comes back to communication. Just comes back to coming back to the table and having that conversation and understanding each other's perspectives.
I think that humans, we tend to be very in the moment. We're certainly concerned about our own self-preservation and survival. We're not great long-range planners, and I think what we've gotten to a point where we have to start thinking that way, right?
Maine's future is all of ours, but so is, the health of the ocean. It's all of humanity's.
So we finally had to leave Maine and sail south. Looking back on it, as we were taking off, I was thinking about this feeling and this thought of how much we can butt heads with each other and how much we can disagree on things, but that maybe that's not all bad, that we can also come up with some really creative solutions.
If you want to access more content, consider joining our community on Patreon. You can find details in the video description. Thank you so much for watching.